This looks more like a hunting lodge than a United States Army Training Center, but it's really Camp Hale, high up in the mountains of Colorado. You see, when you're fighting a global war, men and machines must be prepared to travel over all sorts of terrain in all kinds of weather. And here's the machine that will do just that. The famous Weasel you've heard about and read about. One of war's unique developments in the field of transportation. The Army describes it as a troop and supply carrier, but the men who build it and the GIs who use it call it the Weasel. Like its namesake, the Weasel can travel stealthily and swiftly over the most treacherous of ground surfaces. Now you see this amazing versatile vehicle on the screen for the first time, for it was a carefully guarded military secret for 2 years after Studebaker started production. The Army ski troopers 14,000 feet above sea level. Let's hear more about the Weasel. It was conceived on May 17, 1942, the day Army officers and government officials came to South Bend and said to Studebaker engineers something like this: "Gentlemen, we want a vehicle that will travel over snow and ice and frozen rocky ground, wherever a dog team will go. It must be small enough and light enough to be transported by airplane if necessary. What about it? Can you build it for us?" Well, Studebaker's answer came just 34 days later with the delivery of the first pilot models, and that in itself was a record achievement even for an automobile manufacturer. Exhaustive tests in the Canadian Rockies followed. Finally, the Army approved a model for production, and one of the first fleets of Weasels was delivered to Camp Hale. Meanwhile, those engineers, never satisfied, were continuing their experiments and conducting their own tests in the rugged, yes, and frigid north woods of Michigan. That's typical of automotive manufacturing methods, hard-headed and persistent, and always looking for ways to improve. The company's own engineers and drivers were following their usual practice of tearing them down to make them better, finding out what makes them tick or stop ticking. The first production model had its engine mounted in the rear, and it performed well on level ground. But when the Weasel started to nose up a steep grade and tried to claw a footing in the loose snow, it had a tendency to dig itself into a foxhole. The engineers licked that in an improved model with better weight distribution and greatly improved traction. Among other things, the engine, a Studebaker champion, was switched from the rear end to the front. This new model was called the Corrigan after the wrong way flyer of the Atlantic, because, as compared with the first model, it appeared to be going the wrong way. In the lead are 2 Weasels of the first model. The third is a Corrigan, which the company built on its own initiative. But even this model didn't go into quantity production. The engineers next incorporated all the improvements in design they had test-proved with the Corrigan into a third model, one that would carry more men and haul a heavier load, and this officially became the M29. The top isn't metal, for the Weasel is not armored. A removable fabric top serves to temper the chill winter wind. Camouflaged to fade into snowy landscape, the Weasels went on and on for days of grueling tests. It travels on a continuous track made up of rubber-padded steel plates. The new models have wider tracks and also twice as many bogie wheels to spread out the weight. Bogie wheels are those rollers you see above the track. Then the engineers asked, what about desert sand? Snow hasn't stopped them, but take them out on the Indiana dunes and see what happens. Well, they were plenty frisky when the soldiers set them to climbing up and down the steep and shifting sand dunes that are ordinarily considered impassable. Those weasels leaped around, cutting figure eights in the loose sand to give a dramatic demonstration of their maneuverability. That proved the Weasel would have no trouble negotiating a beach. Then one day, the Weasel got its feet wet, and from then on, there was just no holding it back. They designed a bow and skirts to give it speed, and they added rudders just in case the Weasel should take it into its head to go swimming. They trotted on the ground. That is, if you can call ground that slimy, sticky gumbo of a Louisiana swamp. Its performance was astonishing in the swamps, on muddy river bottoms, and hopping over rice paddies. Up to this time, the Weasel kept its feet on the ground. But now came the water test. And so one day, the Weasel rolled out of the mud and made straight for a stream. From the beginning, the hull had been made watertight. Now the wide tracks acted as propellers, and with rudders, it steered as pretty as you please. Out of all this came the water Weasel. It carries 3 men besides the driver, and it carries them just about everywhere, in deep water, in thick swamp grass, in clinging mud. Down in the swamps of Louisiana, the Weasel proved it could climb out of a deep channel, scale a steep bank, and take off across country without bothering about roads. Just watch them as they maneuver over this punishing terrain of back-breaking grades laid out in checkerboard pattern, like a faded old quilt. Not only has Studebaker built the Weasel in large volume under contract with the Ordnance Department, Army Service Forces, but it also has helped to train expert drivers and maintenance crews for the Army. Drivers that can jockey these sure-footed vehicles over hills and hummocks that would twist a snake's backbone. Incidentally, just for the record, that is not a jug in the back of the Weasel, but a spotlight. Tested and proved in the snows of Colorado and Michigan. in the swamps of Louisiana, and over the sand dunes of Indiana. The Weasels have seen action in Italy and France, in Greenland and the Aleutians, and now are contributing to the defeat of the Japs in the Pacific area. Go get 'em, Weasel.